The sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the packed hall of the Silver Creek Community Center. 7-year-old Emma Carter clutched her pink ceramic piggy bank tightly, coins rattling softly inside as tears blurred her vision. Her heart pounded painfully, each beat resonating with the rising bids. $40,000, announced the auctioneer, his voice booming with authority. Do I hear 45? Emma's trembling gaze followed the bidding paddles rising swiftly, each upward motion slicing through her hope like a merciless blade. Across the crowded room stood Max, her father's K-9 partner, a strong German shepherd whose loyal eyes scanned the audience restlessly. The dog's ears suddenly perked, his gaze locking onto Emma's tiny figure. With a sudden and desperate lunge, Max tugged sharply at his leash, startling his handler. A low, urgent whine broke through the murmuring crowd as Max strained toward the girl. The handler pulled back, regaining control, but the room had already witnessed the undeniable connection between the child and the dog. Margaret Carter gently wrapped an arm around her daughter's thin shoulders, squeezing softly as fresh tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. This auction wasn't merely about acquiring a pet. It represented Emma's only living bond to her father, Deputy Sheriff David Carter, who had been tragically killed in the line of duty 5 years earlier. Since that heartbreaking day, Emma hadn't spoken to anyone, except Max, her father's loyal companion. $50,000, called out a man near the front, his voice carrying a decisive edge. Emma's breath caught, fear tightening her chest. She knew they couldn't compete with such amounts. Rick Thompson, Emma's stepfather, shifted uneasily beside them, his face betraying a flicker of relief Emma couldn't yet understand. Rick believed Max was keeping Emma trapped in her grief. Margaret, however, knew better. Emma's tiny hands shook violently, coins clinking within the fragile piggy bank. She had saved every penny since her father's passing, hoping that someday it would be enough to bring Max home. $55,000, came another voice, James Hammond, owner of a prominent security firm, clearly determined to win. Emma looked helplessly at her mother, her eyes wide with panic and despair. Margaret gently brushed Emma's tears away, her voice barely audible above the murmurs of the crowd. "It's okay, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, though her voice trembled, betraying her own anxiety. "We'll find another way." Yet Emma knew the truth. Max wasn't just a dog. He was the only connection she had left to her father, the only soul she had spoken to in 5 long, silent years. Her grip on the piggy bank tightened as hope faded into the painful ache of loss. Suddenly, a quiet voice broke the escalating tension from the back of the hall. $60,000, the voice said calmly, carrying a note of finality that drew every eye. Emma turned to see Steve Bennett, a quiet, reserved rancher known to be wealthy but rarely seen participating in public affairs. Margaret caught her breath, confusion and curiosity flashing across her face. She had no idea why someone like Bennett would involve himself, but a fragile thread of hope began weaving through her heart. The hall fell silent, every breath held as the auctioneer paused, scanning the room. Hammond's jaw tightened visibly, but he said nothing. $60,000, repeated the auctioneer, his voice ringing clear. Going once, going twice, sold. Applause erupted, yet the sound barely penetrated Emma's thoughts as reality slowly sank in. Bennett had won the bid. But what did that mean for Max and for her? As Emma clutched the cold ceramic tighter, she locked eyes with Max once more. The dog stood perfectly still, gazing back with solemn recognition, as if understanding all too well the uncertainty hanging between them. Emma silently prayed that this wasn't goodbye, counting on you folding under pressure. Margaret's gaze sharpened, determined. "I won't fold, but I need your help, Mr. Bennett. I can't fight this battle alone." He nodded solemnly. "Call me Steve. We both have personal stakes here, Margaret. We'll see this through together." A waitress approached, refilling their coffees and smiling softly. As she stepped away, Bennett leaned forward slightly. "I've arranged a meeting tomorrow with someone who might provide critical evidence against Hammond and Meridian Bennett said quietly. But it won't be easy. We must tread carefully. Margaret agreed immediately. The possibility of finding justice, of giving meaning to David's sacrifice, filled her with renewed purpose. That night, Margaret sat beside Emma on her bed. The child held tightly to the small police badge her father once wore. Margaret gently touched her daughter's shoulder, feeling the tension beneath her fingers. "Emma, sweetheart," she said softly. "Tomorrow I'm going to meet someone who might help us bring Max home." Emma's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope in their depths. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but no words emerged. Instead, she squeezed her mother's hand tightly, a silent promise of trust. The following afternoon, Margaret found herself standing alongside Bennett outside an old farmhouse on the edge of town. A weathered man named Tom Abrams greeted them, ushering them inside cautiously. Abrams, a former Meridian Pharmaceuticals employee, had worked alongside Bennett's daughter. Nervously, he handed Bennett a stack of documents. "These show unauthorized chemical experiments," Abrams said, glancing around anxiously. "Your daughter was killed because she found out too much. Deputy Carter and Max got too close. Emma knows Max has evidence. He won't stop." Margaret's heart pounded as she examined the papers. David had died protecting these secrets. Now she held the key to justice and Emma's future in her hands. Abrams looked at Margaret, his expression grave. "This isn't just about your dog or your daughter, ma'am. These people are dangerous. If they find out I spoke to you..." Margaret met his gaze steadily, feeling a fierce resolve within her. "I won't let them hurt anyone else. Not again." Later that evening, Margaret returned home, placing the documents securely in a locked drawer. She walked quietly to Emma's room, finding her asleep, clutching David's badge tightly. Margaret gently smoothed her daughter's hair, whispering a silent vow to protect her at all costs. Downstairs, Rick sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen. He looked up, eyes heavy with regret. Margaret sat across from him, the silence stretching between them. "I made a terrible mistake," Rick admitted softly. "I thought removing Max would help Emma let go, but I've only made things worse." Margaret's voice remained gentle but firm. "If you truly want to fix this, then stand with us now. Support Emma and Max, not Hammond." Rick nodded slowly, his expression earnest. "I will, whatever it takes." Margaret rose, pausing briefly at the doorway. "I hope you mean it, Rick, because right now, trust is all we have left." That night, as snow continued to blanket Silver Creek, Margaret lay awake, her thoughts heavy yet clear. She knew the battle ahead would be difficult and dangerous. But as she listened to Emma's gentle breathing through the thin wall separating their rooms, Margaret knew exactly why she would fight, no matter the cost. Emma deserved healing, David deserved justice, and Max deserved to come home. Final auction scene. Corrected. The sun rose pale and cold over Silver Creek, the kind of morning that seemed too still before a storm. Inside the Carter home, Emma sat at the kitchen table in her best dress, her tiny fingers clutched around a chipped pink piggy bank. She hadn't spoken since the night before, but her determination was louder than any words. Her eyes never left the window, waiting. Margaret moved around the kitchen with nervous energy, fixing Emma's hair into two neat braids, hands trembling slightly. Rick lingered by the door, the tension between them eased by a fragile truce. He had done the unthinkable, withdrawn his support from Hammond and donated the last of his savings to Emma's cause. They drove in silence to the Silver Creek Community Center, where the annual law enforcement auction was already bustling. News crews had set up outside. Inside, rows of chairs filled quickly with donors, reporters, and town officials. But Emma had eyes only for Max. The moment Officer Reynolds led Max into the hall, the German Shepherd's ears pricked up, nose twitching. He scanned the crowd until his gaze landed on Emma and froze. The dog's body stiffened, then relaxed into a tail wag and a soft whine. The crowd noticed. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "That's her. That's the Carter girl." Margaret gripped Emma's hand. "Stay close, sweetheart," she whispered. The auction began with the usual fanfare. Gift baskets, vacation vouchers, memorabilia. But the energy shifted when the auctioneer, a broad-shouldered man in a suit 2 sizes too tight, stepped up and announced the final item. Next up, K9 Max, 7 years old. Trained in narcotics detection, search and rescue, and suspect apprehension. Starting bid, $2,500. Margaret raised her paddle immediately. "Do I hear 3,000? The auctioneer called. A paddle went up. James Hammond, slick in his Navy suit, seated beside 2 of his associates. He didn't even look at Emma. 3,000 from bidder 42. 3,500, Steve Bennett raised his hand. The bidding moved fast for 1,000. 5, 6. Rick put a hand on Margaret's shoulder as she raised their final bid. 6,000. Emma opened her piggy bank quietly beside her, counting out her coins, laying each dollar and cent on her lap with shaking hands. 7,000, Hammond called. Bennett didn't flinch. 10,000. A hush fell over the room. The numbers were rising faster than expected. Margaret sat frozen. Hammond leaned toward the auctioneer. 12,500. Bennett raised again. 15. Murmurs swept through the hall. Margaret's chest tightened. This was beyond anything they had left. 20. Hammond barked. A pause. Then Bennett stood. 35,000. Gasps erupted. The auctioneer blinked. 35,000 from bidder 28. Do I hear 40? Hammond hesitated. One of his associates leaned in, whispering urgently. He raised his paddle again. 45,000. Emma's small voice suddenly pierced the tension. Wait! Every head turned. Emma stood, holding up her pink piggy bank with both hands, her voice shaky but clear. I want to add my money. The auctioneer hesitated. Miss, this is an adult event. She's a bidder, Bennett interrupted calmly. And this is her savings. Emma walked into the aisle. Her little shoes clicked on the wooden floor. Max stood now, alert, watching her every step. Officer Reynolds gripped his leash, but the dog didn't move. Emma held up a single dollar bill. This is everything I have. Please. He's not just a dog. He's my dad's partner. He's all I have left. The room fell silent. Even Hammond looked caught off guard. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Current high bid is 45,000. Do I hear more? Bennett raised his paddle. 60,000. Hammond stood stiffly. 70. But before the auctioneer could respond, Max broke his sit-stay command. He pulled hard against the leash, stepping down from the stage and moving directly toward Emma. Reynolds tried to restrain him, but hesitated. Emma dropped the dollar, letting the piggy bank shatter on the floor, coins scattering like fallen stars. Max reached her side and sat, pressing his body against her legs protectively. Emma bent down and wrapped her arms around his neck. No more bids, Bennett said quietly, his voice edged with something final. 75,000, Hammond said sharply. He stared at Bennett, jaw tight, but didn't counter further. Sold, the auctioneer announced, voice ringing above the sudden eruption of applause. Some out of relief, others from genuine joy. Margaret rushed to Emma, tears spilling freely as she crouched and pulled both her daughter and Max in her arms. Rick followed, a silent man with a new purpose in his eyes. Guardian, now no longer divided. But just as Officer Reynolds reached a hand over the leash, officially, Sheriff Robert Evans stepped forward. Not so fast, he said. The room hushed again. Department policy requires formal decommissioning for a working K9. Emma can't be his handler. She's a minor. Liability is a serious concern. Policy doesn't cover what just happened. Bennett said calmly, stepping beside Margaret. Evans frowned. I sympathize, but rules exist for a reason. Emma looked up at him. My dad said Max protects people. That's what he does. That's who he is. Bennett placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. Let's take this up with the town council, sheriff. In the meantime, you've got your money. Max goes home tonight. Evans looked between them, eyes hard. Only temporarily. Final placement decision will be made after council review. Margaret felt her knees weaken, but she stayed strong. For Emma. For now, Max was coming home. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The hearing room at Silver Creek Town Hall felt more like a courtroom that morning. Rows of folding chairs, filled with townsfolk, Off-duty officers, reporters, and city officials all turned toward the front, where a long table stood. Behind it sat the town council, Sheriff Evans, and representatives from the district legal board. At the center of the room sat Emma, her fingers curled around Max's leash like it was a lifeline. Margaret sat beside her daughter, spine straight, emotions tucked behind a carefully composed expression. On her other side, Rick adjusted his tie, eyes steady with a new kind of conviction. Across the room, James Hammond was flanked by lawyers in sharp suits, eyes like glass. And standing near the back, arms crossed, was Steve Bennett, quiet but resolute. Councilwoman Teresa Blake began the meeting with a calm voice. This proceeding concerns the placement of K9 Max, retired service dog, and the petition to assign him into private civilian care with the Carter family. Due to the unique circumstances, we're here to determine if an exception can be made to existing department policy. Sheriff Evans cleared his throat and leaned forward. With all due respect, this is about public safety. Max is highly trained. Search and rescue. Narcotics, suspect apprehension. These dogs aren't house pets. They require handlers certified by the department. Emma Carter is a minor. Rick stood before anyone else could. I was the one who doubted this from the start, he said, his voice rougher than usual. I thought Emma's connection to Max was unhealthy, that it kept her stuck in the past. But I was wrong. That dog didn't trap her. He brought her back. He's the reason she's speaking again. He looked at Emma, who sat motionless but alert. I tried to stop this, but now I'm here to say I stand with them, with Emma and Margaret. Max belongs with this family. There was a murmur from the crowd. Councilwoman Blake raised her hand. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Dr. Martin, can you speak to Emma's current psychological progress? Dr. Martin Winters stepped forward. Emma exhibits symptoms of selective mutism linked to trauma from her father's death. Traditional therapy yielded little change until regular interaction with Max resumed. Her verbal expression, emotional regulation, and trust improved drastically in the presence of this animal. Removing Max now would be profoundly disruptive. The opposing counsel stood. While we sympathize, we must consider long-term liability. There are legal frameworks for a reason. That's when Bennett stepped forward. Then let's change the framework. Heads turned. I've established a trust, he said. It covers training, insurance, therapy, and quarterly evaluations. I've arranged for certified K9 professionals to oversee Max's continued training under Emma's care. This isn't charity. This is responsibility. And Emma is more prepared for that than most adults. Hammond's lawyer jumped in. Mr. Bennett has a personal interest here. Bennett cut him off. My daughter, Sarah, worked at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the company your client now contracts for. She died 5 years ago, at the same time David Carter was investigating that company. Max was part of that investigation. Hammond isn't here for the dog. He's here to bury what that dog knows. The room went still. Councilwoman Blake raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence to support that claim? Bennett's attorney stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table. Internal memos, whistleblower reports, training records, including details of Max's alerts during Deputy Carter's final investigation. Suddenly, this wasn't just a custody debate. It was a scandal. Hammond's legal team tried to object, but the tone of the room had shifted. The council reviewed the documents quickly. Sheriff Evans paled as he skimmed one page. I remember this case, he muttered. David was on something big. Councilwoman Blake leaned forward. Mr. Hammond, your company's continued pursuit of Max, despite multiple rejections and the emotional impact on this child, is frankly troubling. She turned toward Emma. Miss Carter, would you like to speak? Emma looked up, her voice shaky but audible. Max was my dad's partner. Now he's mine. He keeps me safe and helps me remember. He helps me talk again. I don't want another dog. I want him. A moment of silence. Then the councilwoman nodded. We've heard enough. The council stepped away for deliberation. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Emma sat silently, Max's head resting on her knee. Margaret didn't say a word, but her fingers trembled slightly as they clutched her daughter's shoulder. Finally, the council returned. In light of the extraordinary circumstances, Blake began, and the comprehensive measures proposed for Max's care and supervision, the council votes unanimously to approve his permanent placement with the Carter family. The room erupted in applause. Margaret hugged Emma. Rick pressed a kiss to Emma's head, and Max let out a low, contented woof. But Councilwoman Blake wasn't done. Furthermore, Max's status will be updated from retired K9 to certified therapy dog. He will continue working, this time to help children like Emma. Tears streamed freely down Margaret's face. Hammond and his lawyers packed their briefcases in silence as they exited the building. Neighbors lined the walkway, clapping. Reporters leaned in to catch a glimpse of the small girl who'd fought the system and won. That night, back home, Emma curled up on the porch swing. Max lay beside her, ears flicking toward the sound of frogs chirping down by the creek. The air smelled like wildflowers and fresh-cut grass. Margaret brought out hot cocoa. Rick followed, holding a small wrap box. "What's this?" Emma asked, voice steadier than ever. Rick handed it over. "A compass," he said. "It was David's. Figured Max helped you find your way again. Might as well have something to guide you forward." Emma held it in her palm, fingers brushing the worn brass edges. "You know what Daddy used to say about Max?" she whispered. Margaret smiled. "Tell me." He said Max could always find what was lost. Emma looked up at the stars, then down at the dog by her side. "I think he was right.